Do your tomato seedlings look like this year, or are you worried if you try they might? Do you want them to look like this instead? Well, stay tuned. You can find out the 3 mistakes I made this year trying to start my tomatoes from seed, what worked and what didn't. If you're new here, hi, my name's Mary. I'm in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and I've started this YouTube channel to show my journey of gardening. I've been gardening for at least a decade, and I've grown tomatoes successfully as well as a number of other fruits and vegetables and lots of flowers. Typically, I've grown in containers because we do live in a large urban setting and I haven't had access to an in-ground garden, but we've been so blessed in the last year that we now have a house where I can grow outside in the ground as well as on a balcony upstairs with containers. So this year, I started a number of things from seed to fill out my garden. And boy, did I make some mistakes with tomatoes. I'm here to tell you what those 3 mistakes are. First, a quick talk about my setup this year. So to start all my seedlings, I started with yogurt containers that I repurposed by putting some holes in the bottom for good drainage. I filled them up with some good quality potting mix that had fertilizer in, and I had a grow light set up downstairs that we would keep on between 14 and 16 hours and turn off at night. The seedlings were all covered until they were about this tall to help keep that humidity in, and then the cover was taken off. At that time, I used a fan to help circulate air around the seedling. This year I started 3 varieties of tomatoes. They're all from West Coast Seeds, and 2 of them were new to me, new seeds this year that I purchased. These Tiny Tim cherry tomatoes. My sister-in-law has started these and I've grown them a few years from her seeds, and they've always done really well. These Optimax Romas, which were new to me, I was really looking for a good quality Roma tomato, specifically for canning, and this one was really sold to me on the description. And then I have these Sancolas that were my sister-in-law's from a year past. She had struggled to start them, so I thought maybe I might have some trouble with them. Now, they come with instructions on the back. And I feel like I started them following the instructions. We started them a little bit before 6 weeks on transplant because I live in a colder climate. I did want to give them a bit more of a head start. So they were probably started about 7 weeks. We're still looking at potentially frost this week, so it will be after May 24th when they'll be able to be planted outside. Okay, so let's get into what are the mistakes I made. Number 1 was not realizing the difficulty level or the instructions with my seeds. So when I purchased these tomatoes from West Coast Seeds, I was really focused on what this variety was going to give me in terms of growth. When I started experiencing challenges, I went back on West Coast Seeds site and realized that these are considered moderately challenging to grow, and that they had a whole lot of additional instructions that weren't included here. One big one that I was not doing was I didn't start my seeds, I didn't germinate them on a heated mat, which seemed okay to me because I had perfect germination, I had 100% germination, but then it said the optimal growing condition for the seedlings was 10 degrees Celsius. That's just not possible for me. I live in Canada, outside is freezing when we start tomatoes, so I started them inside in my basement, which is the coolest place in my home, but we have forced air heat. It's 18 degrees. I don't have a cold cellar, and I don't have an outdoor greenhouse. I don't know if that's a make or break factor for this particular variety, but realizing that there was a whole host of other instructions that went with it was a big mistake and a big learning curve for me. I'm used to other types of things to start from seed, like a zucchini or a basil, which is much simpler, much more beginner gardener friendly. And so I think next time, if I'm starting to experience any problems, or even before I start, I'm gonna go and make sure I know everything I can about the variety I've purchased. My number 2 biggest mistake was trying to problem solve early on instead of trying to restart the seeds. I think if I had done both, I likely would have ended up with a better outcome. And so for example, even when my seedlings maybe weren't doing well, I up-potted them. So this is that Roma variety. I up-potted it into this larger pot, as I did with the Tiny Tims, and you can see worked really well for one variety, did not work at all for this one. I thought, okay, well maybe it's the type of pot. Maybe there's something with the moisture because these peat pots, they let more moisture out than say a plastic pot. So I up-potted to a plastic pot and thought maybe that was the, solution. I thought maybe it needed a bigger pot. And honestly, the only one that's done okay from these Romas is this one, but this doesn't look healthy. Like this, it's really curved and it's still got a number of dead leaves and it's just not thriving. I don't think the bigger pot was the right solution. I think the reality is I had quite a while till planting. Like it's not even planting time yet. I still have probably a week, maybe a little bit more till these go outside. I could have restarted them, especially after I had got online and gone, oh man, like there's different things going on that I should have done. I wouldn't have been able to achieve that cooler temperature, but maybe I could have restarted. So I think if you're experiencing some really strong challenges initially, don't be afraid to restart your seeds. You might lose a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks growing outside, but it could make all the difference for you. So I think the number 3 mistake that I made was around watering. I know as an experienced tomato grower that tomatoes are very particular when it comes to watering. Too much water and it's a problem, too little water and it's a problem, and I've definitely experienced blossom end rots in my container gardening before where I didn't have optimal watering conditions. So I think that same factor played out in seedlings for me as well. I likely kept them a little bit too wet for too long. So when you're initially starting seedlings, you want that soil to be moist to get things started. I think once that plant is starting to form, then you want to really start pulling back on the water for tomatoes. And I suspect some varieties are more forgiving than others, which is why I'm seeing success with some varieties and not others. And so I think, again, this had been, if you go back to number 2, if I had just restarted, that's probably something I could have done differently and perhaps seen a bit more success with from the beginning. But Mary, you say, you have all these lovely tomatoes. In fact, these are Roma tomatoes. You screwed up all your Roma tomatoes. How is that possible? I bought them. These are seedlings I purchased from Costco, and you know what? They're gonna end up on the same price point that I paid for those West Coast seeds. And that matters because if you're like me, you're a home gardener, you're in an urban setting, and you're not growing a ton of seeds, you will often purchase these seed packets and maybe not even go through them while they're all still really viable. And so I think there's no harm in purchasing seedlings, especially when something hasn't worked out for you, or if it's just a challenge you're not ready to take on this year. That's absolutely okay. And remember, I did have success. Actually, these tiny tins, these little cherry tomatoes, I love these. These are great for containers. Really happy. I think I have 2 or 3 of them that worked out. And so all is not lost in the tomato world for me this year. So if you made it to this point in the video, I really want to thank you for coming and listening to my beginner mistakes. I really hope that your tomato growing has been going much better than mine. And you know what? Hey, if you're on team buy those seedlings, that works too. Please leave me a comment down below on how you're doing your tomatoes this year and stay tuned for my next video. Bye.